to another episode of Strictly Speaking. We're so happy you're joining us tonight. Tonight, our guest is a neighbor of ours just down the road on the other side of Hillsborough Street, Raleigh Little Theater's executive director, Heather Strickland. Heather, welcome to the show.
Hey, Josh, thanks so much for having me.
Hey. Facebook already blew up this week with some questions for Heather about how microwaves work, or I don't even remember the other ones. Were there some crazy ones on there?
There was lots of questions about finding tractors, which is a very old joke among my friend group. So,
well, if you're here tonight, ask her how to find a tractor, because I'm not going to do that. All right, so let's get started. As we ask all of our guests, start off with, in your own words, can you define for us or tell us what it means to be an executive director?
Sure. Yeah, I'm pretty certain it's the best job in the world. And I'll be a little bit more specific because I'll talk about being the executive director of a community theater, because it really is, my partner, my artistic director, Patrick Torres, says all the time that we give folks the opportunity to live their best creative life. And I love that, because that feels like what a community theater is. And so as the executive director of a community theater, I get to be the one that helps make sure that that happens, right? It's all the support functions that wrap around the creating and the teaching theater to make sure that those things are available for folks, that they're accessible, and that there's a financial foundation beneath all of that to make sure that we can keep doing it in the best way that we want to do it. So that's generally what I get to do on a day-to-day. How that sort of plays out is that, me and my team are responsible for marketing all the shows and our education programs, fundraising for all the things that we do here, and then managing all the business side of things and making sure that people get paid, that contracts get filled out, that all of those things happen. At the same time that we're also thinking about how do we engage our community? How do we recruit more volunteers? How do we embrace more volunteers? And also, how do we really think about what it means to serve our community through creating and teaching theater? Because as a community theater, we're not necessarily about putting on the big spectacular productions. What we're about is offering those opportunities to folks that, maybe their 9-to-5 job has nothing to do with the arts or nothing to do with theater, but in the evening, they get to come be a part of the creative process and creating magic. And, if that's not community, I don't know what is. So yeah, I get to do all of that and support a lot of brilliant artists. And I am a big believer in the power of art to change individual lives and to change societies and to change communities. And so I get to lead all of that.
So thank you so much, Heather. So tell us, how did you get into this role? I mean, where did you start? How did you get into the arts, and what was your path to RLT?
Sure. So, I started as the executive director of June of 2020. Which is a terrible time to lead a theater. I'm sure you feel me on this.
Uh-huh.
Certainly I haven't been doing it all that long. I've been doing it under extraordinary circumstances that I do not recommend at all. But really, there was no way I was going to say no to this opportunity, even given what was in front of me when I took it on. My background, I was one of those people that was working a 9-to-5 job that wasn't necessarily about the arts. So, my professional career was really focused in nonprofit management, public service, government. So it was really about always working at state level systems, serving local communities across the state. And then at night, I was living this other life as an actor, a director, a fight choreographer, an intimacy choreographer. And really, when this opportunity came up, it was my way to sort of merge both of those worlds. Because I had the expertise around nonprofit management, around really strategic thinking about how do you support communities. And I had this incredible love and passion for the arts, and I understood the theater I had been serving on the board of directors for RLT for a couple of years, and I have been volunteering at RLT since 2005. So I had this incredibly close relationship with RLT, and it was one of those moments, of I had a lot of folks that were asking me, are you really sure you want to leave a very comfortable, stable state job that you're going to have through a pandemic and go into arts that is certainly not as stable? And I, towards the end of the interview process, when it looked like I was really possibly going to be offered this position, I drove down to Raleigh Little Theater and I sat in the amphitheater to really just kind of consider this. And, everything was shut down. And not only was the building shut down and dark, but like the Rose Garden was under construction. So there was all this heavy machinery. It just looked so sad. And I just sat here and I looked at this organization that I love and adore. And I said, there's no way I'm saying no to this. It was like this moment of, when your best friend says, I need help, you don't stop and question the personal risk. You get in your darn car and you go to your friend. And that's what it was. I was like, no, of course I'm going to take this job. Of course I'm going to do this. This is exactly who I am and what I'm supposed to be doing in the organization I'm supposed to be doing it with.
So what have you learned, or what, like you said, you came from the nonprofit world, the community world, the government world. What lessons did you basically have to hit the ground running learning with a pandemic? What are some lessons that you've learned or RLT has learned that you see will go forward in the post-COVID world that we hopefully will be entering soon?
Yeah, right. Hopefully entering soon. So, what I discovered over my career, I was several years at the state treasurer's office. So I was overseeing communications for State Treasurer Janet Cowell and the retirement systems for all state employees, the health plan for all state employees, local government commission. So it was all about working at the state level and thinking about the public services that we provide across the state of North Carolina. And then after that, I spent several years with an organization called Smart Start, which is a network of nonprofits. There's 75 partnerships across the state that serve all 100 counties, and they focus on early childhood care and education. And I worked at the state level offices around that. So my work was really giving me insight in, like, at a state level, so at a systems thinking level, how do you strengthen communities? All of my work was focused on how do you provide resources, expertise, education, capacity down to local communities so that they are strengthened in whatever way that meant, given my responsibilities. And so I really loved that work. I love this idea of how do you make every individual's life in a community better, and not only do it in one community, but then replicate it across the state. And so I was working at this, systems level, but working with local communities and understanding how they were creating these local systems of support for what it meant to really, really change lives. And I loved that work. I loved it. You really get into a lot of like collective impact work of how do we bring together all these different organizations to create a social support net that is there for everyone to take advantage of and make sure that we're, rising all tides. And so, what that meant is I was going from a state level to a community level, and I was switching for how do I use art in that way? How does theater become that collective impact? And it was especially interesting doing that switch during a pandemic because, yes, we weren't creating theater the way that we were used to creating theater. We weren't providing our education programs. But the big thing that we weren't doing was connecting with our community in the way that we were used to connecting with our community. And that's huge for us at RLT. Everything we do is because of volunteers. So to come in and to think about, yes, how do we survive? How do we keep creating? How do we keep teaching? But then the priority always was, how do we stay connected to our community? And what does that look like? So, we've held that as really core to how we're going to survive this. It was really yes, for everything that we're trying to do virtually, we realize that, you know, a virtual show does not require nearly the volunteers that we would for a live show. So, okay, we're going to do this show virtually, but what is the community connection, right? So, you know, you saw us doing things like we had our Midnight Dreary Festival, which we produced radio plays, but then we also put that out to the community and said, create your own piece that is based on the works of Edgar Allan Poe. And then here's the hashtag, and let's create it, you know, let's create this art together. And I think that that will continue forward as, you know, we hold on to the lessons that we learned from this terrible pandemic about, you know, there's different ways that we can connect to our community. It doesn't have to be location based. You know, there's ways to increase accessibility. There's ways to do this. You know, I don't, we talk about, we very often do, you know, talk backs or panels around our shows, but you had to be in person for those. And I'm not sure that that's going to be the case ever again. Like, why wouldn't we live stream those now? You know, so I love this idea of how are we a community system that is changing lives through theater.
Yeah, I agree. And I wholeheartely agree about the non-in-person part. I mean, we're essentially inviting everyone to our living rooms or our houses every time we turn on Zoom. So I think it's great. Hey, so we have our very first question from the audience. So Philip
Is it
asks,
about tractors?
it is not, but there's plenty of time to get those tractor questions in. Philip asks, Heather, your passion is inspiring. About how much of your time is spent fundraising?
Oh, well, right now a lot, because certainly, you know, a majority of the income that is coming into the theater right now is fundraised income, which our community has been incredibly generous to us during these tough times. Also, you know, when we started the pandemic, we had an open position of our development manager position, which of course we were not able to fill. We haven't been able to fill that. And so I am filling the shoes of executive director at the same time that I am the development manager right now. So I'd say, goodness, it's probably easily 40 to 50% of my time right now is really spent on fundraising. But I mean that in a very broad sense. Like, fundraising to me is not just the individual donors, but it's the corporate relationships, it's grants, it's foundations. It's also, right now, that also means like figuring out all the public money that is coming our way too, right? There is the payroll protection program that we're navigating. There's potentially this shuttered venue operating grant that is coming. So we'll see.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, can you take us through a typical day for you? And I know there's probably not a typical day, but you know, what does a week in the life of Heather Strickland look like?
Yeah, so I mean, that certainly changes wildly. You know, a lot more of my time is spent, of course, here, as we probably all are experiencing these days. So I think it would be very different if it wasn't pandemic times. But I spend a lot of times, you know, still being new to the organization. It is important to me to make sure that I'm connecting to all the folks that have very long relationships with RLT. I mean, we were started in 1936. There are folks that are very connected to this organization and the history. So just knowing those folks, knowing their relationship. And then we're also spending a lot of time as a full staff. You know, there's certainly so much to be learned. I mean, anytime leadership changes at an organization, then the organization shifts. So there's that. And then there's this pandemic that we're going through. And then there is all the learning that we're understanding with some of the racial reckonings that we've been facing this year too. I mean, these documents of We See You White American Theater, those BIPOC demands, you know, we have to spend time with those. We have to have these conversations, because as we know that sort of the base models of a lot of theater practices, like subscription models and donor models and how we do budgeting, we know now that those are problematic and they are racist in many ways, and we can't just not do anything about that. So we're also spending a lot of time as a staff understanding those, figuring out how we're going to change organization. And then I also spend a lot of time, certainly, figuring out, how do we create theater? What does our next season look like? How do we plan those things? And of course, I have a fabulous partner in our artistic director, Patrick, that we're just wrestling with a lot of those big questions and planning for things. And then, like today, my day got completely upended because we were supposed to open Snow White this weekend in our outdoor amphitheater. But one of the team members on Snow White tested positive for COVID, which meant that we had to shut everything down. We had to cancel the shows that were supposed to happen this weekend. We'll delay opening to next weekend. But then, we had to contact over 200 ticket holders that were supposed to see the show this weekend and move them. So there's a lot of that, all right, now we're moving to plan C, and now it's plan M, and now we're on plan Y.
Yeah. Wow. Well, you mentioned RLT's been around since 36. Can you tell us a bit about Raleigh Little Theater?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's really interesting being in this time right now, because there's all these conversations that are coming back up about the Federal Theater Project that really created the little theater movement, back in the 30s. We were born out of that movement, and we are the oldest continually operating a community theater in the country, which is huge. So, we came out of this period of time of, again, the world was going through really tough times, and there was this big swell of, we've got to pull together these public funds to inject them back into the communities. And, a lot of the focus of the Federal Theater Project was really about accessibility to theater, to make sure that those ticket prices weren't getting too high, that it was really something that the community could access, and that the stories were about the community. So it's a really interesting time to be here now, because it feels like it's such a mirror to our beginnings. And then, it's also a good reminder that, with that sort of long history, Raleigh Little Theater has been through really hard times before. This is not the only one. So we reflect on, some of the things that have happened over that very long history. I mean, there's books written about this place and the history that is a part of it. And, we've got this beautiful campus here. So we have the Rose Garden, which is right next door to us, which is part of our amphitheater, which is outside. And then we have two theaters that are inside the building. Our Sutton Theater seats about 300, a little bit less than 300. And then we have a black box Scatty Goodwin Teaching Theater that seats about 120. And then we have a full education program too. So in a non-pandemic year, we might have, 10 different productions in any of those spaces, plus a full education program that runs all year long for every age.
Awesome. So you also mentioned earlier your partner, Patrick. Now, as I understand it, things shifted in the way that the executive director and artistic director work together. Can you speak a bit about that relationship and how you two work together?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, when I was hired, just structurally, the executive director reported to the board of directors, and then the artistic director reported to the executive director. And that structure has changed for RLT a couple times in that 80 plus year history. There have been times where it was the other way, and the artistic director reported to the board, and managing or executive director reported to the artistic director. And that's pretty typical in what you see in theater management. Sometimes it's the artistic director that's at the top, usually called a producing artistic director, and that sort of structure. And then sometimes it's the executive director at the top. Well, and that switched depending on what the organization needed at that moment in time. There was times in RLT's history where it wasn't on a solid financial foundation, and they really needed to sort of prioritize the business and financial side, and so they made a decision to be the executive director in that top position. Well, we started to learn a lot about power structures and how they can be toxic. We've also learned a lot about how white leaders kind of need to get out of the way in many spaces. And as we really thought too, for us, about RLT and how when we thought about rebuilding, right? Because everyone has taken a big significant hit during this pandemic. When we talk about rebuilding, of course, that means rebuilding financially, because we've absolutely taken a huge financial hit. It also means rebuilding the artistic side of the house. It means restoring the art and all the opportunities that we give to our community. And one of those should not be prioritized over the other when it comes to rebuilding. We need to rebuild back both, and they need to be rebuilt together. And so when when we really started thinking about this, we said it doesn't really make sense for this moment in RLT's history for these two positions to be uneven, for us to say, because it does say something about that structure. It says we're valuing this side of the organization more than we're valuing this side. And so with our board of directors, we worked with them to figure out what a shared leadership model looks like for RLT. And now for the first time in RLT's history, it is co-led by the executive and artistic directors. So I will also say that for the first time in RLT's history, it is co-led by a woman and a man of color, which has not been the case in the past.
Awesome. Yeah, awesome. Great. Thank you for that. Everyone, remember, Q&A is open. Heather's ready to hear about these tractors. Make sure you ask those questions, throw them out there. We've got about a little over 30 more minutes left, so make sure we ask those questions as we go. So, all right, we talked a lot about the executive director, but that's not the only thing that Heather Strickland's known for. We, NC State, we hire you oftentimes to come in to do fight choreography and intimacy coaching. Can we talk a bit about the fight choreography first? What does that mean, and how did you get involved with that?
Yeah, so I actually was first introduced to the idea of fight choreography when I was in college, studying theater. And we were getting ready to do a production of Cyrano de Bergerac, lots of sword fighting. And I was actually assistant directing that show. And the director said, we're going to bring in somebody from the Society of American Fight Directors to choreograph all these shows. And I was like, what is that? And he sort of explained to me what the Society of American Fight Directors were. And my initial response was, you're kidding me. There's a bunch of dorks out there that pretend to sword fight. And I didn't realize how much I was going to eat my words later in life. So we had this fight choreographer come in, and, he was not only, choreographing these incredibly beautiful sword fighting scenes, but he was also teaching the technique of rapier, and it was mostly rapier, some of it was rapier and dagger. And I was a dancer. My background is in dance and in ballet. And I was watching this and I was like, this is dance just with pointy things. And I became very interested in it. And so I started studying. I went to school in Florida. So shortly after that, I ended up moving to North Carolina, and I immediately found one of the certified teachers with the Society of American Fight Directors, Jeff A.R. Jones, who has been my mentor for many years, and started training with him and started certifying by weapon within the Society of American Fight Directors. And, really that is a body that is dedicated to making sure that our theater and film spaces are safe when it comes to violence on stage and screen. And so, anyone that goes through the training, they are given everything that they need, not only the techniques of many different weapons, but also the knowledge of how to choreograph a fight very safely between two or more folks, or sometimes there's individual fights that happen too on stage. So fight choreography is really about, anytime a script calls for some sort of violence, or a director sees a moment in a script that they think there should be violence, we're brought into the rehearsal room to, one, make sure as the top priority that everyone is kept very safe, both physically safe and mentally and emotionally safe, because there's a lot that happens, when you get into a heightened situation on stage. So we make sure that, and then we have all the techniques and all the tricks for how to make a fight on stage look awesome and make people feel like badasses.
Awesome. Well, Liz asked, how do you become certified to teach stage fighting? Is there a program or exam you have to pass?
There is, yeah. So the way that it works is, I highly recommend certifying with the Society of American Fight Directors, and they have various teachers. They're scattered throughout the country. The best, and I'm not biased at all, in this area is Jeff Jones. You can find him at Stage Combat Academy of North Carolina. And each weapon requires at least 30 hours of training in that weapon. And then once you get your 30 hours of training, then you put together a test fight, and there's requirements around the test fight. Like they have to have certain number of moves so that the person that's adjudicating it can see that you know the different aspects of the weapon, and then you get adjudicated. And once you get adjudicated, it's like a bit of a pass-fail system, but there's different levels of passing. And then the number of weapons that you certify in determines which level you are within the society. And so I have certified in all of the weapons that are available to certify in. So could go on to become certified teacher director, but at this level, I am still at just the broad certification for combat.
Awesome. All right. And let's see here. Philip asked, do you still plan to act in, direct, or otherwise help produce performances at RLT or other theater groups?
That's a great question. I think I'm still answering it for myself. I think at this time, my focus has really got to be on RLT and focusing on kind of what I've got to do as far as the executive director. I think when it comes to the fight and intimacy work, I hope to continue to do that. Probably not at the level that I was doing it, because I was pretty much at a rehearsal every single night, and I don't know that that's gonna be possible. It might be a bit more time before I'm able to get back on stage or direct, because certainly as I think those efforts would need to be focused at RLT, and my job is to make sure that other members of our community get those opportunities. So I would be hesitant to feel like I was taking that opportunity away from somebody in our community.
Awesome. Well, speaking of community, Amy Sawyers-Williams is here as Mark Tolbert tonight. Asks, how do you think community engagement looks at RLT once the pandemic is over? What will change? What will you go back to? And lastly, how will your past work inform your community engagement strategies?
That's a good question. We've been thinking so much about this, right? Because there's that, our education program was the first one that flipped very quickly and figured out how to offer classes virtually. And, during that switch, yes, of course, we lost some students that said, no, virtual theater classes are not for me. But we also saw a whole lot of new students that we had never seen before. And, it was one of those moments of pausing and going, we have to hold on to this. Like, this is telling us something. If there are folks that have never been to anything RLT, show or education program, and now they're signing up for our virtual classes. So, we've been really thinking about that. We've also been thinking about how, I mentioned before that we've been thinking about how do we provide opportunities around every show for our community to participate, like with the Midnight Dreary Festival, like saying, okay, we created these, now it's your turn, share your thing on social media. So I think where we'll see it grow is more of that thinking around every initiative that we do. Like, it's not going to just be any longer about, oh, we've got to produce a show and the curtain goes up on this day. Mm-hmm. I think what we'll also think about is, what are the other ways that the community could get involved with this? What are the virtual aspects of this show that we could promote through our social media channels? And I also think that, we're thinking about models like, we have a great education program. It's our Teens on Stage, Teens Backstage program. And it's just this beautiful, we get a bunch of grant funding for it from the city. We try and keep the registration costs really low for it. And the teens get this opportunity to really come in and own a production at the same time that they're getting to work with experts in these different fields to learn more about the craft. And they're still producing a final show. what does that program look like if we can take it and like take it to different high schools? Well, what does that program look like if we can sort of capture that virtually or pieces of that virtually? Or what does that model look like if we apply it to every production that we do, right? So that there is this sort of learning and producing aspect of every show. And you know, we don't necessarily know the answers to all of those questions yet, but that sort of engagement and that sort of like ensuring the accessibility, ensuring that it truly is always a learning experience because we are a community theater. Those are some of the very exciting conversations that we're having right now.
Awesome. Thank you. So, Amy, I hope that answered, there's 3 or 4 questions buried in there.
Yeah, Amy, did I get to all of them?
I think you did. Yes, I think so. All right. So switching gears back to, oh, yes. Yes, you did. Thank you. Switching back to the artistic side, talk to us a bit about what intimacy coaching means and how does that work?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a newer craft, but on Saturday Night Live, what was it, like 2 weeks ago, they were making fun of intimacy choreographers. So I think we finally hit the big time with intimacy choreography. I mean, if we're being made fun of on SNL, then certainly the awareness is starting to get there. So the idea really grew out of the world of fight choreography, because so often as fight choreographers, and I had this happen early in my career as a fight choreographer, you know, we'd be brought in to do a fist fight or a sword fight, and then a director would be like, so there's this kiss that's like 2 more scenes down, could you just sort of look at that too? And I mean, we would go, okay, but we didn't have training to do that. I mean, we sort of knew like how you choreograph physicality and movement, but it was not like training on how to do stage kisses or anything beyond that when it came to intimacy. And so a group of fight choreographers started to really talk about this and said, we have to make this more intentional. We have to think about this because, you know, we have started to consider how do we keep actors emotionally safe when they're doing violent scenes. We have to think about how we keep actors emotionally and mentally safe when we're asking them to do these very intimate scenes. And, you know, I will say that it was mostly women that were having this conversation and they weren't getting a lot of traction. A lot of the leadership within the fight world at that time, male dominated. I'm sure you can imagine why. And they didn't see it as a priority. And so this conversation really wasn't getting the attention or the traction that it needed. And then Me Too happened. And that wave hit the theater world just as much as it hit the rest of it. And it really, folks became way more aware. All of these stories, casting couches, showman, you know, all these things started to come out. And collectively, we started to learn that, oh, these can be really unsafe spaces if we don't have someone in there that is protecting the actors, protecting the space, protecting everyone else that needs to be around that space too. And so this idea of intimacy choreography that was, yes, focused on the choreography that needs to happen within an intimate moment, but was also really focused on how do we create a space that actors can step into and out of to make sure that they're protecting their hearts and their minds, because our bodies don't necessarily know the difference in those moments, right? Our bodies have reactions to intimate moments. So how do we make it so that our bodies and our hearts and our minds can step out and know that that is separate from who we really are? And then also just the issues around consent. You know, when as an intimacy choreographer, I am always very aware of consent. And, you know, what that means for me is if I am choreographing something and I'm checking in with an actor on how do you feel about doing this? And they go, yeah, okay, that's not consent. And my job is to read that as that's not a consent. And, you know, what we hold it is consent is nothing less than an enthusiastic yes. And so I am making sure that no matter what happens in any rehearsal room, that there is always an enthusiastic yes from everyone in there. And also creating a space for like consent can change, right? Like, so if we're working one night in rehearsal and everyone's yes, 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 we're good with what we're doing, but then later that night an actor goes home and they're like, I don't know that I do feel okay about this now that I'm thinking about it. And then they come back the next day, and giving them the space to be like, consent changes. And if that's not okay, if that's not an enthusiastic yes anymore, let's do something else. And like, it's making sure that I'm also an advocate for the folks that have to step into that space, and making sure that, you know, if I hear a no, or I hear maybe, that my job is to go to the director and be like, hey, this idea isn't going to work, but I'm an expert at this. So let me give you 4 more options that I think could really work for this scene and advancing this story.
Yeah. And what I loved about having worked with you directly, like, in fact, I will see you tonight, I think at like 8 o'clock. We're doing some intimacy work for upcoming play, but you were also concerned about not just the actors that were engaging in that intimacy, but those around. Because I mean, you asked me personally, hey, you're filming this, do you feel okay? And I really appreciated that.
Yeah. Well, and it's checking in on words too, right? Like when you're stepping into, you can't just walk into a room and say, we're going to do the sex scene. Maybe people have moments of like, I don't know about that word, so we're going to call it scene 62.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to call it the action that happens on page 35. Right. And then you set that context, and then that becomes the norm for how everyone talks about it in the room, because we've just got to be, you know, I mean, we know so much more about trauma and what each of us individually walks into any moment in our lives with. And, you know, part of my job, whether I'm stepping in as a fight choreographer or an intimacy choreographer, is to be aware that somebody is walking into the room with some trauma. And like, I can't just ignore that, right? The space can't, we ask too much of people that do theater. We are asking them to bare their souls in front of an audience that is already vulnerable. Why would we go into a situation where we're asking them to be more vulnerable and possibly harm themselves further? And, you know, I think as we evolve, that understanding more about racial trauma, like, I think we're going to have to do better about how not only are our rehearsal spaces responsive to potentially violent or assault trauma, but also racial trauma.
Awesome. Okay. So I do have a question that it kind of hits on all three, the fight, your intimacy, your executive work, and even your non-theater work. Has there ever been a project or a show or something that you're like, I want to work on that. I want to play that part, direct that part, or, see that show come to our stage?
Oh my goodness. There's so many. I had like 6 things just run through my brain. So I've always wanted to direct Chicago, mostly because like that female rage, I feel it, I know it, I wanna tell that story. Talking about Cyrano de Bergerac, I've always wanted to do a flip gender Cyrano de Bergerac, so that you're flipping it so Cyrano is female identifying, and then because then you sort of get into like body images like that women deal with. So I think that's an interesting story. Plus it puts all the fighting roles for females, which I'm just a big fan of that. Goodness. As far as like a children's show, The Little Prince is always one that I've wanted to tell. I think that's just such a charming story. And I think there's so much in it for our world right now. I could go on and on.
Okay, well, I'll stop you there. I didn't hear any tractors in there, so make sure you guys are asking these questions. You really need to hear something. Well, okay, so we've got your dream items. What about some projects that you've worked on in the past? What's something that you're most proud of, or you look back and think about, that was my favorite part of my career so far?
Yeah, so I'll go to something outside of the theater world. So at my previous job, when I was working at Smart Start, a lot of the work that we did at the state level was work with the General Assembly on policy that was good for families and kids for North Carolina. So did a lot of advocacy work. And one of my favorite things that I got to do was advocate for the statewide expansion of Dolly Parton's Imagination Library. Now, Dolly Parton's Imagination Library is this fabulous program that Dolly founded, that any child under the age of 5 gets a book delivered right to their house every month, and it's free for the folks that participate in it. And we really wanted to bring that program to North Carolina and make sure that every child in North Carolina under the age of 5 had this opportunity to get free books into their house. Because there's a ton of research about like literacy and how just having books in the home is a really big game changer for kids. And so me and a team of folks at the state offices for Smart Start worked on this legislation. I am the one that wrote the legislation that provided $10 million of funding to the Smart Start Network to get Dolly Parton's Imagination Library out to every single child under the age of 5 in North Carolina. We worked for months on that, but I'll tell you what, when you've got Dolly Parton attached to legislation, it's a pretty easy sell to lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. So it was more fun to push than some of the other legislation that I had worked on. And so we were successful. We were in the budget, we got the funding. And what happened was the Dollywood Foundation, who we were of course working with on this, that they oversee the program, they said to us, as soon as you all get this program available to every zip code in North Carolina, we'll send you Dolly. And so we worked really fast. We got all of that funding out directly to the communities. The local Smart Start partnerships worked their butts off getting every zip code enrolled in the program so that they could then get the books to the kids. And so we did it, which was amazing. And the Dollywood Foundation held true to their word. And of course, they sent Dolly. We threw this big gala, and Dolly Parton, like, it's the biggest event I've overseen in my entire life, because we had Dolly Parton. And as soon as word got out that Dolly Parton was in Raleigh, North Carolina at Marbles, like, of course it sold out. 800 people were there. We had legislators, we had Governor Cooper, Governor Hunt came. I mean, there was security all over the place. Like, I had never talked to so many different like state highway patrol and security officers. Of course, Dolly only had one guy that just had a lot of weapons strapped to him. But it was just this, like, not only were we, and that program is still going. So if you have a child under the age of 5, please visit smartstart.org and sign your kid up to get these free books from Dolly in the mail every month. So it just felt like, a moment in my career where I was able to be a part of making a really big difference. And it was just a ton of fun, and I learned so much, and I hung out with Dolly Parton for a day.
Okay, I think that should be the highlight of the career so far.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. So now tell us about your current job, and what is the favorite part of your job as executive director at RLT?
Yeah, I mean, it's the team that I get to work with. This is just an amazing group of humans, and it's been a terrible year, and it's been hard for everyone. And we've lost members of our team. We had to do layoffs. And that's painful on so many levels. I mean, it's not only, it's like, you're losing your partner in your work, but there's a big emotional piece that goes with that. And this team has gone through those things together. They've held on to each other through those things, not literally, because we're not allowed to do that in COVID times, and continue to be innovative and figure things out. Like our production manager, Dennis, like, he didn't have to produce shows virtually before this. Like, it wasn't part of what he was in charge of, like, getting the production side of things up and making sure the sets got built and, pulling all the designers together. And then he figured out how to live stream to social media platforms and run multiple cameras and make sure that all this technology was working. And that, like, it's that sort of thing that this team, like, came together, figured out, and kept going for a year of that. It wasn't that we just had to do it once. It's that we've had to do that for a year and just figure out time and time again how we completely redo everything. I mean, we joke now about like, I don't know how this worked at the normal times. Like, I'm going to have to relearn, how did we used to do this when we could have in-person audiences? Like, how did we load in a show? How do we get an audience in of 300 people? That sounds so intimidating now.
Yeah, we're going through the same. Yeah, it's like, wait a minute. Oh, what if Jamie just painted our floor, our scenic painter, and he was just talking about how, oh, my hand is so sore because he hasn't used it in a year.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's great. No, I know your team over there is lucky to have you, and they are pretty awesome. Hey, so we got some questions up here. Do you think your experience acting prepared you or benefited you in your career outside of the theater? And if so, how?
Absolutely. So, I mentioned working at the state treasurer's office. And, a lot of my job then was supporting State Treasurer Janet Cowell. So preparing her for speaking engagements, writing a lot of her speeches, like I was in charge of her public persona and that identity and that brand. And I never told her this, but really what she was getting was acting training from me. But truly, the work that I would do with her about how to enter a room, how to engage with people, how to walk up to a podium, how to confidently say, it was everything that I had learned in all of my acting classes. And, I do think, for as much as my career has been focused on more the administrative side of nonprofits, I think my theater degree is like way more useful than like my communications training, because the theater degree is all about like understanding tension, seeing it, addressing it, being responsive to it. And those are the core skills that really, not only allow you to work through any situation that you're encounter, but I think they're great leadership skills. And, it really is a part of what I sort of embraced when I realized that I was on a track to be a leader, that I wanted to step into an executive position, was having the confidence of like, I have all of this training of how to interact with humans. And that is the main job as an executive, is to empower those around you and to raise up those around you. And a lot of that skill set came from the world of theater, when that's what we're doing. We're constantly examining human relationships and how they go right and how they go wrong. And that practically applied to life means that I am really good at understanding, what makes people passionate and how do I just get the barriers out of their way so that they can live into that.
Nice. I like that. And on the flip side, how has your experience and work in the non-theater world helped your work as a director, an actor, a choreographer?
Yeah, so I think it really is closely aligned to what I mentioned before about, understanding what it takes to change communities and humans, and then being able to like understand how storytelling plays into that. Right? It's the start. So everything that I had worked on up until this point, it always started with what's the story, right? Like whether I was changing a community so that they had a better infrastructure for childcare, or whether it was because we were looking at rolling out a different plan for public employees. Like it always starts with what is the story that is telling us we need this change. And so I realized, like that story has so much power. And if you think about how we're going to come out of this pandemic, right? Because, where this is such a rare moment in history is that we're all going through the same thing. Like how often does every single human go through the same thing? And that means we're experiencing it all very, very differently, but we're all going through the same thing. And we're going to have to process all this because we're all experiencing trauma at some level. going through this, and there's gonna be, even when we are on the other side and we can be in spaces together, we've got a lot longer to go processing everything that we just went through. And the storytellers, those of us that are storytellers and responsible for the storytelling, are going to be so critical to that processing, because we're going to raise up the stories about this, all the stories about this. And that's going to help people process, understand what they went through, understand what others went through, understanding collectively what we went through. And that understanding is going to drive change. It's going to drive policy change. It's going to change, like, engagement change, some of the community engagement questions that were asked. It's going to drive that change. It's going to change, everything about how we walk through the world. But it starts with the storytellers, and that's us.
Yay. All right. Let's see here. We've got about 8 minutes left, and Liz has asked a question. Now, I'm not sure what position she may be asking for, but say you are looking to hire someone. What qualities or abilities would you look for in that person?
Oh, that's a great question. So yeah, I think that there's slight variations of what the response would be depending on the position that is being hired for. But I think always at the heart of hiring, it's making sure, we're talking so much about the core values of RLT right now. It's a really good time to examine what are our core values and who are we, and let's dig into those. And I think it's, really getting to the heart of, somebody that's going to be a part of the organization that you're a part of, like being so clear about what those values are, and then making sure that they understand them and that those values are matched. I mean, so I think it's really about qualities that show an excitement for the values, the shared values, a passion, and a willingness to jump in and help a team figure it out. And those are very different than like specific skill sets that we might need for a job, but I think that core has to be there.
Awesome. Great. And Liz also wanted to mention their high school did a gender flip version of Cyrano. So yeah.
Wait.
All right. So let's see here. Was there a class outside of so you got your education is in theater, but was there a non-theater class that you have found to be invaluable to your career?
It's been so long since I've been in school. Yeah, so I actually, because I was on a communications broadcast track when I first went to college. What I was going to do for a living was going to be a news anchor. So I was really studying broadcast news, and I had this class that was all about radio news. So how do you create news for radio? How do you deliver stories on the radio? And I had this really fabulous professor. He started the course by saying, I've been shot at, I've been run over by a horse, I've been handcuffed, nothing you can do can surprise me. And it's because he had this like incredibly long career as a news reporter and had been on assignment. He had, traveled the world. So he had this really just interesting background that he was, bringing to this class in radio news. And I think what was really helpful to me about that class is it was sort of the marriage of information and performance. Like I started to see the connection of like, yes, you can have all the facts, you can have the information that people need, but if you don't deliver it in a way, or if you're not thoughtful about the packaging around it, then it doesn't really matter. And, that really sort of drove, so much of my career is in communications, marketing, branding, and, especially working at a state systems level in so many ways, I really started to understand that I had these complex messages and information to deliver. And I also knew that the rule of communications was the simplest message always wins. And so like, how do you, and what I love to do is to still like understand how those things work together. Like, how do you comprehensively deliver a message that's not reductive, because reductive messaging is not helpful, but is still to the heart, clear, and centered in values.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Well, we're at time now for our last question for the night. And actually, Noelle had asked this earlier, but we're going to go ahead and throw it out there now. If you had one piece of advice for a student or a young person wanting to, or any person wanting to entering your field, what would that piece of advice be?
Oh, it's hard for me to answer that because I feel like I just finally got into my field. But I think I think what I would say, because yes, I am now stepping into the theater world as my career, but I don't think without all the other experience that I've had that I would have stepped into it with such clarity of who I am and what I bring to this role. All that nonprofit, all that government work gave me such a sense of who I am and what I want to do in this world that I have that clarity bringing it to me. So I think my piece of advice would be like, perfection is the enemy of the good. So as you're finding those opportunities, like it might not be the perfect opportunity, but it is an opportunity that's going to lead you to the next opportunity. That's going to lead you to the next opportunity. And whatever the opportunity is, whether it turns out to be a great one or one that maybe wasn't so good, you're still going to learn from it. You're going to understand more about yourself from it, and you're going to carry it into the next one. So, don't shy away from maybe some of those opportunities that don't feel like maybe they're not the perfect fit, because otherwise you'll just keep searching for that perfect fit, and that just ends up in forever searching and maybe not moving forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Heather, for everything tonight. And thank everyone for joining us tonight. Heather, again, thank you for joining us. I'm sorry we didn't get to the tractor question. I know that was on everyone's mind, but we'll maybe next time. And
maybe next time. Thank you so much, Josh. This is a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.